Berlin, winter 1943. Snow drifts against the glass of a dimly lit officer's quarters. Inside, a German major sits alone at his desk. The hum of the radio low, a half-empty glass of cognac beside a pile of unread reports. His hands tremble slightly as he breaks the seal of a letter that smells faintly of perfume. The handwriting is delicate. The words tender. She calls him mein Liebling, says she dreams of his return, of walking the Rhine in spring. Every line seems alive with affection, warmth, and longing. He closes his eyes, letting her voice echo in his mind. For a moment, the war fades. The smoke, the screams, the endless maps, all disappear. What he doesn't know is that this letter was never written by the woman he loved. It was composed in a cramped London basement by a British spy, trained not in combat, but in the art of emotion, and soon these forged love letters would travel through military channels, climb through Nazi intelligence ranks, and deceive even Hitler's most trusted generals. Because sometimes the deadliest weapons in war are words written in love. By the early years of World War II, Britain was fighting not only a military war, but a psychological one. While bombs fell over London and soldiers clashed across Europe, another battlefield emerged in the shadows. The War of Deception. From secret rooms inside Whitehall to underground offices beneath Baker Street, a new kind of soldier was being trained. Men and women whose weapons were paper, ink, and imagination. The British called it black propaganda. Their mission was simple: to make the enemy believe what wasn't true. The most sophisticated of these deception units came under the 20 Committee, also known as MI5's XX system. Headed by the brilliant John Masterman, it coordinated an entire network of double agents, feeding the Germans a steady stream of half-truths and carefully crafted lies. Each operation had one goal: to manipulate Nazi intelligence into making fatal strategic errors. But the British soon realized that technical deception, fake radio messages and false reports, wasn't enough. The Abwehr, Germany's intelligence agency, was trained to distrust anything that came from captured agents or intercepted transmissions. They needed something personal, something emotional, something that no officer would ever suspect to be a lie. And so, the idea of emotional correspondence, letters of love, longing, and heartbreak, was born. It began as a small experiment inside MI5's counterintelligence section known as B1A, responsible for psychological manipulation. Handwriting experts, linguists, and even romance novelists were quietly recruited. They studied the nuances of affection, how lovers wrote in 1940s Germany, the words they used, the rhythm of intimacy. The team even imported genuine German stationery, stamps, and ink to make the illusion flawless. The goal wasn't to seduce an enemy, but to control one. Each letter was meant to reach a real German officer or courier already under observation. The letters often contained subtle clues, references to troop morale, supply shortages, or imagined fears that would later influence German decision-making. Every phrase was deliberate, every emotion engineered, and as the operation evolved, one British agent's work stood out among them. A spy whose forged love letters became so convincing that they reached the desks of several high-ranking Nazi officers. His identity would remain classified for decades, but the effect of his deception rippled through the intelligence network like a whisper of treason wrapped in silk. These weren't just letters. They were psychological traps disguised as affection. The Germans believed they were reading the hearts of women waiting at home. In truth, they were reading the words of the enemy, written with a pen that bled both sentiment and strategy. And soon, those letters would begin to shape real military choices across occupied Europe. Because the British had discovered a terrifying truth: when logic fails, emotion still commands. By 1943, The tide of war had begun to shift. The German army, stretched thin across multiple fronts, was still formidable, but increasingly vulnerable to misinformation. The British knew it, and so did the men and women working in London's secret offices under the command of MI5 and the Political Warfare Executive, PWE. What they were building wasn't just espionage, it was theater, an illusion so convincing that even the most disciplined German minds would fall under its spell. The spy at the center of this particular deception, known in surviving archives only by his code name. The forger was a linguist turned intelligence officer. He'd once worked as a translator in Berlin before the war. He understood German sentiment, idioms, even the subtle emotional tones that shaped their writing. To him, a letter was not just ink. It was psychology, rhythm, and vulnerability combined. When MI5's B1A section launched a series of personal deception campaigns, the forger proposed something audacious: to use romantic letters as a channel for misinformation. His logic was ruthless, yet poetic. A soldier in love reads with his heart, not his mind. At first, the operation targeted mid-ranking officers stationed in France and Norway. Through intercepted mail, MI5 analysts had identified several German soldiers who were emotionally isolated, men desperate for connection, for tenderness amid chaos. The forger crafted letters from imaginary women back home. Secretaries, nurses, even school teachers, each with a unique personality, handwriting, and tone. The letters began innocently. Talk of rationing, the cold, the loneliness of waiting. Then, over weeks, they grew more detailed, weaving in small, believable hints about supposed Allied weaknesses, false rumors about British naval shortages, or fake references to troop movements overheard by friends in uniform. To ensure authenticity, MI5 had the letters sent through neutral countries like Portugal or Sweden before re-entering German mail systems, giving them postmarks that appeared genuine. The German postal service, overwhelmed and fractured, rarely questioned them. One of these letters reached a German logistics officer in northern France, another, a communications specialist in Norway. Both contained seemingly harmless details about relatives working in occupied territories who'd heard of Allied struggles or internal tensions. These phrases were designed to plant subtle seeds of doubt or confidence wherever MI5 needed them to grow. And the plan worked. German intelligence absorbed these letters, cataloged their details, and passed the information upward. Within months, false intelligence originating from the forger's creations began appearing in Abwehr field reports, influencing troop readiness and even shaping resource distribution. To the Germans, these were intimate words between lovers, too private, too emotional to be fake. To the British, they were invisible weapons, proof that the heart could be exploited as easily as the battlefield. The operation's brilliance wasn't in its scale, but in its humanity. Because in a war fought with tanks and bombers, it was love, or the illusion of it, that quietly began to rewrite strategy. The human angle: in every war, soldiers crave more than victory. They crave meaning. Behind every uniform is a heart that remembers softness, warmth, and home. That was the hidden battlefield. The forger understood better than anyone. He knew that the German officers, many stationed in isolated garrisons across occupied Europe, were trapped between loyalty and loneliness. They were far from their families, living in barracks where silence echoed louder than artillery. Letters from home were their only escape, the last fragile bridge to humanity in a world collapsing under mechanized death. The British exploited that fragility. Inside the small MI5 office, under the hum of typewriters and the smell of burnt coffee, the forger would study intercepted German correspondence for hours. He read the letters of real wives and fiancés, their rhythm of affection, their idioms, their cultural warmth. Then he mirrored it, line by line, emotion by emotion. Every forged letter began with tenderness. My dearest, my heart aches for you. Each day without you feels longer than the last. They were not grand speeches. They were believable whispers. Imperfect grammar, tiny ink smudges, and even mistakes in punctuation were deliberately included to feel genuine. Through these imperfections, he created perfection, the illusion of love. But what made the deception so devastating wasn't the craftsmanship. It was the psychology. The German officers receiving these letters didn't question them, because the human heart is programmed to want belief. They saw what they needed to see: connection in a world of chaos. MI5 psychologists later noted that recipients of these letters displayed measurable shifts in morale. Some officers became distracted from their duties, their focus drawn toward thoughts of home. Others, when the letters hinted at British weakness or exaggerated Allied losses, reported the information to their superiors with conviction. What began as romance became reconnaissance, emotion weaponized with surgical precision. For the forger, each success carried a strange weight. His job was to make soldiers feel loved so they could be manipulated. In the stillness of his London flat, he often reread the very letters he wrote, as if haunted by the emotions he himself had manufactured. There was something tragic in that. The idea that the purest human feeling, love, had been reshaped into a tool of control. Yet, it was also a testament to intelligence mastery, a quiet acknowledgement that wars are not only fought on battlefields, but within minds. By appealing to the loneliness of the enemy, MI5 had discovered a truth far darker than any coded cipher: that even the most disciplined soldier becomes vulnerable when he feels seen, understood, and cherished. The British didn't need to outgun the Germans in this war of words. They only needed to outfeel them, and through those carefully written pages of affection, they did exactly that. The intelligence angle. While emotion was the visible surface of the operation, the true brilliance of the plan lay in its intelligence craftsmanship. A seamless web of forgeries, mail interceptions, and human analysis designed to appear entirely accidental. Every letter that reached German hands passed through an invisible maze of coordination. MI5, MI6, and the Special Operations Executive, SOE, worked together to make the deception self-sustaining, a living organism feeding the Abwehr false confidence. At the heart of this network was B1A, MI5's deception division. Here, cryptographers sat beside handwriting experts, language scholars, and former journalists. They dissected not just content, but emotion syntax, how an officer's fiancé might express affection differently than his wife, how a nurse might write compared to a clerk. Every word was calculated to sound effortless. Even the ink was studied. For maximum authenticity, B1A procured German-made fountain pens and envelopes from neutral countries like Switzerland. The scent of perfume was precisely measured. Too faint would seem masculine. Too strong would appear theatrical. These were not just spies. They were artisans of illusion. The letters carried subtle military purpose. Each one contained small details carefully engineered to influence Nazi assessments. For example, a fabricated line about Allied supply ships struggling through bad weather near Liverpool could reinforce existing German naval assumptions. A casual mention of air raid shelters filling faster every week might convince Berlin that London was on the brink of collapse. The forger's brilliance was in balance. Too much strategic information would seem suspicious. Too little would lose value. So he wrapped each lie in warmth. A paragraph about a dream, a memory, a longing, and then slipped in a single, invisible dagger of deception. Intercepted communications later confirmed that several of these phrases were extracted and repeated almost word for word in Abwehr intelligence summaries. They were accepted as genuine civilian observations, untainted by propaganda. British intelligence learned that the Germans rarely doubted mail containing emotional content. Their analysts were trained to question code, not compassion. To protect the operation's secrecy, the letters were delivered through a combination of controlled leaks and mail interceptions. Some were sent directly through the British postal system to addresses already monitored by the Abwehr. Others were planted in recovered field mail from fallen soldiers. When the Germans found them, they appeared authentic. Relics of a soldier's private life, stained with dirt or blood. It was deception in its purest form, not forced upon the enemy, but discovered by them. Over time, the network grew bold. By 1944, entire strings of correspondence were maintained for months, creating ongoing relationships between fictional women in Germany and real officers across Europe. Every reply from the Germans was studied, decoded, and used to measure the emotional temperature of the enemy's ranks. Through this dance of pen and paranoia, the British learned something profound. In a world obsessed with strength, the most effective manipulation came from appearing harmless, and soon, those seemingly harmless letters would do something extraordinary. They would help shape one of the most ambitious deception operations of the entire war. The turning point of the Operation Spring, 1944. As Europe braced for invasion, the German High Command faced a storm of conflicting intelligence. Reports poured in from the Abwehr, the Luftwaffe, and coastal observation posts. Yet none agreed on where the Allies would strike. France? Norway? The Balkans? Amid this confusion, a set of intercepted civilian letters surfaced. Love notes exchanged between a young German woman and her fiancé, a logistics officer stationed near Calais. The correspondence mentioned small but seemingly credible details. The buildup of Allied ships in southeastern England, increased rail traffic near Dover, whispers of a great storm about to break across the Channel. Berlin analysts saw the letters as confirmation of what many already believed, that the Allies would land at Pas-de-Calais. They didn't realize these letters were the quiet masterpiece of the forger and his team inside MI5. The deception had worked perfectly. For months, the forger had maintained this fictional relationship, slowly feeding subtle clues that aligned with Operation Fortitude, the grand deception designed to hide the real D-Day landing site in Normandy. His lover's letters were merged with other fabricated intelligence from radio messages, fake army units, and double agents like Garbo, creating a perfect symphony of misinformation. When the time came, Hitler himself read the Abwehr's summaries. Every emotional phrase, every seemingly innocent line, reinforced his conviction that the Allied invasion would come at Calais. He ordered critical divisions, including the powerful 15th Army, to remain there, waiting for an attack that would never come. Meanwhile, 200 miles west, Allied forces prepared to storm the beaches of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, when the invasion began, Hitler refused to release the Calais reserves for nearly 7 crucial weeks. That delay, born from the belief in a forged love story, changed history. From a dimly lit MI5 office in London, the forger received the decrypted German message confirming the deception's success. He said nothing. He simply folded the paper, looked at his ink-stained fingers, and whispered, "Words did this." The full unraveling and German realization in the weeks following the Normandy landings, the German war machine scrambled to understand how their predictions had failed so catastrophically. Across occupied France, divisions were cut off, logistics lines shattered, and communication networks paralyzed. Yet Berlin remained confident that Normandy was only a feint, that the real invasion at Calais was imminent. For 42 days, Hitler's generals clung to that illusion. They waited for a second assault that never came. And every day they waited, the Allies strengthened their hold on Normandy, pushing deeper into French territory. Inside the German High Command, Confusion turned to quiet dread. Abwehr reports, once so certain, now read like ghosts of a vanished truth. The love letters that had once reinforced their confidence were still being quoted in field briefings, even as the situation collapsed around them. By mid-July, intercepted communications revealed the first cracks of realization. German officers began to question how so many civilian sources could have been wrong in unison. But by then, the damage was irreversible. The illusion had done its work. In London, the staff of MI5's B1A watched the reports with disbelief. Their emotional ruse, the fake affections of invisible women, had helped immobilize an entire German army group, not through strength or technology, but through trust. When Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park decrypted internal Abwehr transmissions acknowledging enemy manipulation through postal interception, it was already too late for the Reich. The same hearts that once believed in love were now breaking. Under the realization of betrayal, some of the German officers who received those letters never learned the truth. Others did. Through post-war interrogations, when British officers revealed how the operation had worked. One interrogated colonel reportedly sat in silence for minutes before saying, "Then I was never loved at all. No gunfire, no explosions, just silence. The kind that only follows heartbreak and defeat." The war for their minds had been won long before the Allies landed on Normandy's shores. And in that victory, one fact became undeniable. A handful of forged letters had altered the greatest invasion of the 20th century. Post-war revelations and intelligence legacy. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, Europe began to uncover not only the ruins of cities, but the secrets that had shaped their fate. Among the files declassified in the quiet corridors of Whitehall was a folder marked simply Emotional Correspondence Operations, B1A. Inside were hundreds of pages of typed transcripts, intercepted mail, and photographs of forged letters that had traveled from London to Berlin and into history. For years, the true authors of those love letters remained anonymous. Their work was buried under layers of official secrecy, overshadowed by larger deception campaigns like Operation Mincemeat and Fortitude. But those who knew, a small circle of MI5 veterans, understood that the forger's experiment had been one of the most subtle and effective manipulations of the entire war. British intelligence officers later admitted that they hadn't anticipated the scale of its success. What began as a psychological test had evolved into a fully integrated component of Allied deception, a bridge between human emotion and strategic misinformation. The letters had fed directly into the Fortitude narrative, reinforcing what the Germans already suspected and amplifying their certainty until it became fatal. In 1946, during the Nuremberg follow-up interrogations of Abwehr officers, fragments of the operation resurfaced. Several captured German intelligence staff recalled having received or analyzed personal correspondence that supported the Calais hypothesis. To them, the letters had been irrefutable proof, honest, human, and impossible to fake. One Abwehr analyst described it with quiet bitterness. "Real men died because we believed a woman who never existed." The files were archived, the agents retired, and the forger's name was erased from record, replaced with a code name and a single note. Operation concluded successfully. Method highly effective. Emotional manipulation verified. Historians who later studied the files called it a gentle form of warfare, the use of empathy as a weapon. But those who'd been inside the operation didn't see it as gentle at all. They knew what it meant to weaponize affection, to turn longing, the most human of feelings, into a silent instrument of control. The mission was over. The war was won, but in the quiet aftermath, victory carried a strange, uneasy aftertaste, emotional and moral consequences. For the men and women who carried out the deception, peace did not come easily. The war had ended, but the echoes of their words, those fabricated declarations of love, lingered in their minds long after the files were locked away. In quiet London neighborhoods, several former MI5 linguists resumed ordinary lives. They taught, married, raised children. Yet, behind the normalcy lay a strange guilt. They had never fired a gun, yet their words had led to destruction. Their weapon had been intimacy, borrowed emotions, stolen tenderness, rewritten to serve a cause. One agent later confessed, in an anonymous memoir, "We wrote love into existence, then watched it die on paper. We saved lives, but something in us remained haunted, because we learned that even affection could be engineered." The forger himself disappeared from public record, his real name never disclosed. A rumor persisted that he destroyed his personal copies of the letters before his death, saying he wanted to end the ghosts. Some who worked with him described a man torn between pride and regret, proud of the brilliance, haunted by the manipulation. When the documents were declassified decades later, historians were struck not by the scale of the deception, but by its intimacy. This was not the cold precision of military intelligence. It was something profoundly human, the deliberate mimicry of love to mislead an enemy. Moral questions began to surface. Was it justified to exploit the loneliness of soldiers, even if they fought for tyranny? Could love still be called pure if it had been used as a weapon? There were no answers, only silence. The same kind that had followed every forged letter after its ink had dried. Yet even in that silence lay the essence of war's paradox. Victory often demands the sacrifice of innocence, not just lives. Those letters had saved thousands. They had also reminded the world that in the struggle for survival, truth and tenderness can both be casualties. And though the men who wrote them vanished into history, their legacy endured, as proof that in the deadliest war ever fought, the heart itself became part of the battlefield. In war, victory is rarely clean. It is carved from illusion, sacrifice, and choices that stain the soul long after the flags are raised. The story of the British spy who forged love letters is not one of romance. It is a story of humanity's most fragile weapon, emotion. Those letters, written in candlelit rooms beneath London, never fired a bullet, never commanded an army. Yet they moved divisions, shifted strategies, and altered the course of history. They revealed that the human heart, so often seen as war's victim, could also be its most cunning tool. The brilliance of the forger's work was not only in deception, but in understanding a universal truth. Even in the cold machinery of conflict, men still dream of warmth, still ache for connection. That longing became a doorway, one that intelligence could quietly walk through. But there's a haunting irony buried within it. To defeat a ruthless enemy, the Allies had to touch the most tender parts of human nature, to counterfeit love, to invent compassion, to weaponize what should never have been weaponized. Historians now look back and call it psychological warfare. Philosophers might call it something else. The day humanity learned that even its most beautiful instincts could be bent toward destruction. And yet, in a strange, quiet way, those letters remind us of something larger than war. They remind us that people, even soldiers and spies, are guided not only by orders, but by feelings, by the invisible threads of affection, fear, and hope that define what it means to be human. The fake love letters fooled Hitler's generals, but they also forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth, that in the desperate race to survive, the line between manipulation and mercy is paper thin, sometimes written in ink, sometimes in tears. In the end, the war was won not just with steel and fire, but with words born of false love, yet driven by a very real purpose: to bring peace.